Hello, everyone, and welcome. I want to introduce our two of our panelists from inquirED. So, Taryn and Aditi, you could turn on your cameras for us, and maybe Taryn, go to the next slide. Taryn and Aditi, I don't know, maybe could you tell us what an implementation coach does? I think that would be helpful because maybe that term isn't familiar to some of our audience members.
Right. Well, my name is Taryn Peacock, and both Aditi and I are implementation coaches. Essentially, what that means is we work closely with district leadership, with teachers as well, to assist them and support them with implementation of inquiry journeys, our curriculum. We provide professional development, really work through change management. How do we support teachers as they're adopting more of an inquiry mindset? Really just trying to improve as many aspects of teaching and learning through inquiry journeys. All right, Aditi, I'll turn it to you.
All right. So as Taryn mentioned, my name is Aditi. I'm an implementation coach. Prior, I was a K-5 teacher, but before I was a teacher, I was a student, just like all of us here today. And a question that I would have wanted to ask or investigate as a second grader in Island Lake, Illinois, was how are the pyramids built?
And just like Aditi, I was an educator prior to coming to inquirED. I've taught kindergarten through 8th grade. And prior to that, as a 4th grader in Phoenix, Arizona, my inquiry question was, how much can I imagine? So you can see in this image here, I was imagining myself being a superhero.
Perfect. So if you could, in the chat, go ahead and introduce yourself. Share the school or the district that you're from, the grade level that you teach or support, and a question that you would have wanted to ask or investigate. Awesome. Thank you all. Keep those coming in. One reason we asked about a question you may have wanted to investigate is because it helps us remember what it was like to be a kid and allows us to step into our students' shoes, something we'll be doing later in our webinar today. So for today's webinar, we have 4 main goals. So the first is to introduce the QFT, talk about the origin and the steps. Then we'll get to experience the QFT by engaging in the protocol as a learner. We'll observe the QFT in action and consider some of the instructional moves that a teacher uses to facilitate the QFT, and then we'll explore tips and resources for implementing the QFT in your classroom. This will be a pretty interactive session with opportunities to share and engage in collaborative learning. So we're going to start by examining what the QFT is and its purpose. So as Martin mentioned earlier, the QFT is a protocol developed by the Right Question Institute to help learners ask, improve, and prioritize questions. The protocol comes up at the beginning of an inquiry, so during our launch phase, helping students to generate questions related to their investigation. The QFT can be used for many purposes. It can be used across different subject areas. It could be utilized as staff meetings. As Martin mentioned, we use it here at inquirED quite frequently, or meeting with parents. This quote highlights the power of using the QFT. The question formulation technique allows teachers and students to work with questions in transformative ways as it prioritizes students' interests and provides a collaborative civic space for curiosity and wonder. So these 4 bullets are from the book Trusting What You're Told: How Children Learn from Others. And the first thing it points out is that a child asks about 10,000 questions per year before they start school. As soon as children enter school, they ask fewer and fewer questions. Teachers ask significantly more questions than students, and only about 27% of college graduates believe they've developed the skills of formulating and asking their own questions. I do want to note that there definitely is an important role for teacher questioning in the classroom, but we also want to make sure we're nurturing that student curiosity and developing students' ability to ask their own questions. We're going to transition and watch a quick video that surfaces 3 main reasons why the question formulation technique is such a powerful process for developing those critical thinking skills.
Hi, Markeisha here. Why is the question formulation technique, the QFT, such a powerful process for developing critical thinking skills? Here are 3 things you need to know about the thinking abilities practiced during every session of the QFT. Number 1, the QFT promotes divergent thinking. That's the kind of thinking that happens when we brainstorm, the kind of thinking that helps us come up with truly creative ideas. When we are producing questions during the QFT, it's often the 17th, 18th, or 20th question that's most creative, when our brains have moved into uncharted territory. Number 2, the QFT promotes convergent thinking. That's the kind of thinking that happens when we categorize information, the kind of thinking that helps us sort through the good ideas and the not so good ones to find the truly great ones. And number 3, the QFT promotes metacognitive thinking. This is the type of thinking we do when we ask ourselves questions. Questions like, what did I learn? Why did I choose that question? Which question is the most important? Divergent thinking, convergent thinking, metacognitive thinking. One process, 3 powerful thinking abilities. For more information about the QFT, view our other videos or visit the Right Question Institute. Hi, Markeisha here.
Perfect. So teachers in the field share that they find the QFT really valuable by providing students a sense of ownership over their learning. It's equitable. Since there's no answering of questions in the first step of the QFT, students aren't shutting down questions and they're able to learn more about the topic. It sparks investigation, helping students hone in on what's most interesting and most important to them. It offers an opportunity for students to connect and to build on each other's thinking. One student's question might trigger another student's question, and it's an opportunity to assess understanding, including pre-assessment. Lastly, it teaches valuable skills such as asking questions and breaking down a larger question. We're going to take a look at one more video that walks through the key steps and elements of the QFT.
The QFT starts with a Q focus, the spark that jumpstarts the production of questions. The Q focus can be a statement, image, phrase, or situation, as long as it is clear and interesting enough to activate curiosity. One hard and fast rule, though, the Q focus can't be a question. Before you start producing questions, pick someone to write down and number the questions as they come. Then review the rules. Rule number 1. Generate as many questions as possible. Rule number 2. Do not discuss, answer, or judge any questions. Rule number 3. Write down every question exactly as it is stated. Rule number 4. Change any statements to questions. Take 4 to 5 minutes to produce questions using a timer to keep you on task. Once you're done, it's time to improve your questions. Set your timer for another 4 to 5 minutes, then categorize questions into open and closed, labeling each with a C or an O. Next, discuss the advantages and disadvantages of both types of questions. Finally, change one open question to closed, and vice versa. Okay, only a few more steps. First, prioritize your questions, setting the timer for 3 minutes and placing an X next to your top 3. Don't forget to discuss why you've chosen them. Afterwards, take another 2 minutes to discuss and plan your next steps, describing what you'll do with your questions. Don't forget to reflect on what you've done and what you've learned. And that's a 90-second breakdown of the QFT. Now go ask some questions.
So I'd love to invite everyone to share in the chat. What about facilitating the QFT seems exciting, and what's coming up as feeling challenging at this point?
Thank you all so much. Keep those ideas coming in. LaKethia will continue keeping an eye on the chat. Excited to hear all the things that we find exciting and challenging about the QFT. And now we're going to observe the QFT in action. So some of those things that you all have identified, we'll be able to see now in some classrooms. The purpose of observing right now is to identify some of the instructional moves that teachers make as they're facilitating this protocol with students. Of course, this process might look different in any classroom, depending on the context, the grade level. So the QFT looks different in different contexts, but follows some of the same steps and protocols. All right, so the lesson that we are about to observe is from Alyssa Park, who is a 4th grade teacher in Gardnerville, Nevada. They conducted a multi-day mini unit on map making using a 19th century map of Nevada and the QFT to help students practice skills of observation, questioning, inferencing, and independent research. One clarification is that this is not a QFT that is used in inquirED's curriculum, but it is still an effective example of the QFT process. Another difference is that the Q focus in this example is the image of a map, whereas in inquirED's curriculum, the Q focus is always a statement. Right, so as you watch this video, we want you to consider the instructional moves that Ms. Park is making. So how does she use instructional moves and practices to give students ownership, promote equity, spark investigation, help students connect to ideas? How does she see this as an assessment opportunity? And how is she teaching questioning as a skill? You might notice that these are some of the same categories that Aditi mentioned for why the QFT is so beneficial. So as you're watching the video, keep these in mind.
Are we ready to just refresh ourselves on the rules of the QFT?
Ask as many questions as you can.
We went kind of quickly through the rules of the QFT because they are really well versed in the activity. Choose one person in your group to write down the questions if you haven't. Don't forget to write number 1 and then write your question.
Why are there other states around Nevada? Is this before it became a state or after?
Why is there words out?
While kids are working on generating their questions, I don't say anything. I do see a lot of great questions when kids are doing the QFT, but I don't want to say that because then kids think like that's the kind of question I have to ask now because my teacher likes that question. And the whole purpose of the activity is for kids to be asking their own questions and to be thinking, what am I curious about and what do I want to know?
How long ago was this? Why does it have a point on the end like all Nevada maps?
Y'all get to just burst out curiosity.
There's some simpler questions like, what is this a map of? Or where is that? Or why is it blue? And then after they get all those sort of easy questions off their chests and off their minds, they get into these really thoughtful and deeper questions like, why is it that certain towns like Carson City is on this map, but not where I live? When they looked really closely at that original map from the Library of Congress, they started taking those kinds of perspectives about whoever created this primary source, what was their thinking. They're starting to dig at that idea. And so that's what I was really interested in seeing. You guys have a lot of curiosity in your brains today. Now I know that you guys are pros at knowing the difference between open-ended questions and closed-ended questions. So after kids generate as many questions as they can, we move into the classifying them as open or closed. Some of these are tricky. Kids have to come to a consensus within their groups on whether questions are open or closed. After they classify their entire list, they'll choose one open-ended question and convert it into a closed-ended question, and then do the same for a closed into an open-ended question. So we're going to move on to one of our very last steps of the QFT this morning, which is choosing some certain questions. Here's how I'd like you to, as a group, decide on your top 3 questions today. The 3 most interesting questions that we're going to talk about as the class later.
Which ones do you think would help us best understand the picture?
What are the red dots for?
Oh yeah, that one.
This is hard. Why can we see carcinogens not other accounts?
After we ask the questions and do all that, we kind of reflect on what we did.
Your 2 questions to answer. What did you like about asking questions, and what did you learn? What was really special to me was seeing the answers to the first question. What do you like about asking questions? To see the progression of how they answer a question like that over the years really powerful, because at the first day of school when we did this question, they said things like, I don't like asking questions. It's scary, it's hard, it's not my job, that's your job. And they felt weird, or they didn't know how to do it. And then to see them really grow more confident with that skill has been my favorite part of the year. Are we ready?
All right. So now that we've had an opportunity to see the QFT in action in a 4th grade classroom, invitation to, in the chat, please write down what instructional moves you observed from Ms. Park. How did she give ownership? How did she spark investigation? How did she teach questioning, promote equity? Where did you see opportunities for assessment here? Or how did she help students connect to ideas? So feel free to drop any of your ideas into the chat. Wonderful. And I see that someone asked for a link to the video so that you can watch it again. LaKethia has put the YouTube link to the video in the chat if you'd like to watch it after today's session. Wonderful. I'm seeing some comments about how she didn't respond to questions. She chose to be silent so their voices could be heard. She was just moving around the room listening. Students working in small group as opposed to whole group. Every child having the opportunity to ask questions, students really taking ownership. That metacognition where students were reflecting on the questions they asked and how that impacted their learning. And every child having the opportunity and how that connects to equity. Wonderful. Thank you all so much for observing and really identifying those different instructional moves that Ms. Park made. All right, so that example that we just watched was in a 4th grade classroom. Now we're going to get an opportunity to actually experience the QFT. So the purpose of this is that you're going to learn by doing. You're going to learn to facilitate the QFT by engaging in it as a participant. This process is going to look different in a classroom. And in Inquiry Journeys, we do use a modified QFT for younger learners. Throughout this next session of today's webinar, you're going to be invited to both observe a QFT and to participate the QFT. So we'll be doing a little dance between observing and participating, all in the hopes that you'll be able to facilitate the QFT in your classrooms. And in order to do this, I would love to introduce our guest speaker, Erica Sullivan. Erica, can you come off and introduce yourself?
Hello. Hi, everybody. My name is Erica Sullivan. I'm a first grade teacher in Brookline on the Brookline Public Schools in Brookline, Massachusetts. And I was one of a few teachers who last year piloted inquirED, inquiry journeys in my district. And this year I've kind of been helping a little bit with the rollout and also teaching it myself. And here I was, before I was a teacher, I was a learner. There was in first grade in Franklin, Massachusetts. My inquiry question was, how do caterpillars become butterflies?
All right. And Erica, if here you can just provide any additional context about your classroom and the inquiry that we're about to watch you do the QFT for.
Yeah, sure. So in the video clips that you'll see in the next few slides, it's me teaching the first QFT of this school year. The unit is the Families Near and Far unit. Students in this class were introduced to QFT last year in kindergarten during the pilot. So they had a little bit of experience with it, but it wasn't super well established either. So there's a little dance of like kind of knowing what it is, but kind of not.
Thank you, Erica. All right, so prior to launching the QFT, Erica really set her students up for success by defining some of the key vocabulary terms and revisiting the inquiry question. So we're gonna watch a clip where we see the moves that she makes in order to do this.
Food, absolutely. Okay, now that we have activated our thinking about this book, I want to introduce you to some new vocabulary. We learned about the words family and community. Today we're going to learn about two new words. Say culture. Say culture. Say culture. This is our inquiry question. This is our big question we're thinking about for a lot of weeks during this unit. How can we bring families together to form stronger communities? That's not a question we're answering right now. That's a question we're going to think about for a really long time. How we can bring families together to form stronger communities. That is a big question. Right? That's a question that was answered a little bit. Do you think your community got a little bit stronger? Sure. Yeah, sure. They came together. They worked on a project. They did a great job. Absolutely. So all of the families in the community, in our community, in any community you are part of, are unique. And we can always find something in common. So we're about to do something that is really super tricky. I need to see your hardworking faces on right now. I'm looking for friends to be looking and listening and thinking about what I'm saying and have their voices up and not playing with anything in their hands. It's hard. We can do it. Here's the hard thing we're going to do. This is called a QFT task, which is just a fancy way of saying question, focus.
All right. Erica, would love to hear from you if there are any challenges that you faced as you're preparing students with the setup for the QFT.
Yeah, I guess the main challenge is I have no idea what they're going to say. So when I don't know what they're going to get, what they'll have a hard time with the rest of the lesson. So trying to be quick and clear so that we can get to that before I lose all of their attention is important. So giving them as much time as they can in the actual formulation technique while they're primed and ready to go.
Thank you so much for sharing. All right. Aditi.
So kind of piggybacking off of that, something that we often hear is that students don't know what a question is. So we're going to take a look as Erica quickly supports her students with understanding what questions even are.
First, what is a question? Remember, a question is something you want to know. A question is something you want to know. A question is something you wants to know, right? A lot of questions start with question words like who. What's a question word? Who. What. When. Where. Why. And how. And guess what? Questions end with a question mark. Right? So it's something you want to know. Not all questions start with these question words, but you can bet if a sentence starts with one of these questions or one of these words, it's probably a question. So here,
So something I observed is that Erica doesn't spend a lot of time on what questions are with her younger students. And you'll see later on in the video how this choice kind of pays off. In inquiry journeys, teachers present the question focus, which is also kind of the call to action for the inquiry in that launch module. So next, we're going to take a look at how Erica presents the question focus to her students.
here is our question focus. This is going to get a little tricky, and we're going to work so hard. Our question focus is, we can bring families together to build a stronger community. Let's think about what that means. We can bring families together.
I don't know what that means.
To build a stronger community. Now what we're going to do is something hard. We're going to think about questions about this question focus. You might have done this in kindergarten a little bit. We're going to try to think of a lot of questions about this focus. Okay?
Okay.
So this is our focus. I'm going to say it one more time. We can bring families together to build a stronger community.
Erica, I'd love to hear from you. What makes a question focus strong?
Yeah, I think for this one, it's most important to offer many possibilities in the way of question generation, right? So if the question focus is too specific, it can close students off, and it makes it hard to generate questions. And then if it's too general, questions can be all over the place, which they might be anyway. But at least a general question will give them a clearer path to questioning. And then I would also say the question focus is best when it's not leading to students. So we want students to think critically, right, for themselves. So keeping bias out of it as much as possible is also really important.
Thank you.
We're going to take a look now at how you launch the first step of the QFT. So the first step around generating questions where students are coming up with as many questions as they can. So let's take a look at how Erica launches this.
So here's what we're going to do. You're going to work with your turn and talk partner. You're going to come up with as many questions as you can about our question focus. Okay? You're going to come up with as many as you can. We can bring families together to build a stronger community. What are you wondering about that? Who, what, when, where, why, how? Okay? Who are you working with? Your turn and talk partners, absolutely. You're just brainstorming. You're just coming up with questions about this focus. Okay? Turn and talk. We'll be back in a minute.
Erica, something that we often hear is just the difficulty that can come up when managing all of the students asking questions at the same time. So we're curious if you can share what are some of the techniques that you use to ensure that your students are able to work together as they generate these questions.
Yeah, I think I think this one goes beyond social studies and the QFT. We do a lot of practice working together, a lot of turn-in talks throughout the day over a number of subjects, and then a lot of practice listening to each other's ideas. In my classroom, students know who their turn-in talk partners are, so that's who they always work with for, I don't know, that amount of time. And I do pick those partners strategically. So I think that helps with the success of it. Students also know expectations during turn and talk because we've done it so much. So I try not to let it go too long. I don't want them to get too far down a rabbit hole. I also think they'll generate more questions once they hear good ones from other students as well.
And what are you usually doing? Like, as your students are turning and talking, they're working in pairs. Are you able to hear from every pair? What is your role as they're coming up with the questions?
Yeah, I usually try to listen in as best I can. I try not to get too close because I don't want them to think like, oh, my teacher's listening to me. I have to come up with something brilliant, or I have to freeze and not say anything. And often I'll choose a pair or two to sit closer with to kind of help facilitate that as well. So it depends.
Thank you. All right. So remember I said that we are going to be observing, but then also trying out the QFT. So now is your first opportunity to try the QFT. We're going to do the first step. So in the chat, you're going to come up with as many questions as you can for this Q focus. We can bring families together to build a stronger community. Remembering all of the prep work that Erica gave us around what question words are. So use those to support you as you come up with as many questions. All right, and feel free to start putting your questions into the chat. All right, thank you all for participating and generating such fantastic questions. I'm excited to read through those. But for now, we're going to continue on and see how Erica closes out step one. So her students have generated questions. We'll see how she closes out and prepares to move on to the next step of the QFT.
We're going to share our questions. I'm not going to respond to your questions. I'm not going to say, hey, good job, or that's not a question. Or we're not going to answer any questions either if we think we know the answer. We're just going to let people brainstorm their questions. Then we'll have a chance to do something called revise, which just means like make changes. So, question. Remember, our focus is we can bring families together to build a stronger community. Questions. Let's start with who, what, when, where, why, or how. And I'm going to put our question words back up. Jack.
Why did they come together?
Why do families come together? With a question mark. Next. Eliza.
How do they start Noah?
How do families kind of start being together? Next. Yeah. What else? Benji.
Well, where could they come together?
Where can families come together? That we mean by they.
And how could you possibly like make them come? Like, how could you possibly like build like how can you possibly get people together?
And how can you get people together?
Yes.
The question mark. Tricky question mark. Sahant?
What reasons do families come together?
What reason?
No. I think what stuff do families like come do people do for them to come together?
What stuff do people do for them to come together?
No, like what stuff do people do for the families to come together?
What stuff do people do for families to come together? Wow.
That's a long one.
Kita.
When are we going to get them to come together?
When do we get them to come together?
That could actually be a good project. We can put like signs everywhere, and
Just a reminder, we're not ready to answer the questions, but hold on to that, because guess what? At the end of this unit, we're going to get to do a project, and hold on to that, right? When do we get them to come together? Oh my goodness. All right. This is a great start, and we will be adding on to this list at some point. Let's do a triple check right now. First, we're going to ask ourselves, are these all questions? Let's check. Why do families come together? Nod your head if it's a question, shake your head if it's not a question. Oh, it has a question word and it ends with a question mark. Great. How do families start being together? Question word, question mark. Amazing. Where do families come together? Question mark. Question word, question mark. How can you get people together? Question word and a question mark. What stuff do people do for families to come together? That's wanting to know something. And when do we get them to come together?
So as you can see, Erica's taking the time to review what a question is really paid off, because her students were able to produce all of these, which were indeed questions. And if you haven't been able to look in the chat, there's a lot of additional comments of some of the moves that Erica made as she was facilitating that.
The next step, step 2 of the early elementary QFT, is to improve questions. And this does look a little different than the QFT might show up traditionally or in older grade levels. In this particular example, Erica is going to change statements into questions. And as we saw, Erica's students only shared questions, no statements. So we'll take a look at how she addresses this in the lesson.
Okay. So our next job is we're supposed to revise, like take a look at these and make any changes we think we need to make. I actually think these are all pretty clear questions that have to do with our topic. Nod your head if you agree. Is there a change you're hoping to make then?
We actually are having a block party. The dress code school picnic.
You know what? That is kind of like a block party.
Yeah,
so let's
when is the school
change statements into questions. Guess what? None of these are statements, they're all questions. Amazing. What was that?
We're going to go back to experiencing the QFT. So in a moment, it'll be your turn to practice improving a question together. We're going to take a look at this statement, and we're going to change it into a question utilizing a waterfall share. So the way it'll work is that you'll type your question into the chat, but please hold on pressing send until I say the word family. And then when I say the word family, everyone will press enter at the same time, and we'll be able to kind of read each other's questions. So go ahead and lock your question into the chat. How might you change this statement into a question? Some families are big and some families are small. Please don't press enter yet.
Now, the final step of the QFT in early elementary is to prioritize questions. Those of you who are familiar with QFT in upper grades may know that there is an additional step where they're looking at closed and open questions. So feel free to check out some more information from the Right Question Institute if you're curious about that step. But for early elementary, we go into prioritizing. It can be tricky to get young learners to make decisions about the questions that they want to prioritize, and they're engaging in collective decision making. So let's observe how Erica very skillfully facilitates this step with her first graders.
Now, as a group, as a partner pair, you're going to select your top 1 or 2 questions. Your top ones means like the best ones, the ones you're most interested in, the best questions you can find on here. Right now we only have 6. Jinx, just kidding. Your job is to think about with your partner, which ones are the best ones? Your best one or your best 2? It could be one you came up with. It could be one you heard someone else say. Turn your top. Which question is the best one?
Erica, how did you determine how you were going to have students prioritize these questions? Were you thinking about different methods before you selected one?
Yeah, I kind of read this one in the moment. It kind of depended on how many questions there were that were generated, what the quality of the questions were. Sometimes I'll have students think to themselves first and then share with a partner. Sometimes I'll take 2 pairs and put them together to form a group. This one I just did stuck with the tried and true turn and talk, same partner, to make things easier. But yeah, sometimes I switch it up a little bit.
And do you always have a certain amount of questions that you want them to prioritize?
Yeah, I mean, it's usually a small number because otherwise then then everything is important and then none is, right? So usually I'll say 1 or 2. And then we end up with at least enough that there's some overlap in the groups. If I have fewer groups, then I'll ask them to prioritize maybe more so that we can see where the overlap is with what kids are agreeing on. I think the fewer the better sometimes, though.
Definitely. Thank you. All right. And now we'll have an opportunity for you to prioritize questions. Ideally, we would have been able to take all of the wonderful questions that you generated, but there was so many. And so we want you to prioritize the questions that Erica's class came up with. So right now, if you can go ahead and select a top question, so just one of the most important questions, the poll should have popped up on your screen. All right, and we can see that our top prioritized question was, how can you get people together? Followed very closely by, what stuff do people do for families to come together? I noticed that there is some similarities between those 2 questions as well. Erica, if your students were to identify both of those, would you maybe show them the similarities between it, or would you just keep those as 2 separate questions?
I would keep them as 2 separate questions, probably, because I think there's a little bit of a nuance difference between those. And it's really just like which one they think is most meaningful to them, I think. Yeah.
I love that. Really showing the student voice and the importance. Something I noticed earlier is that you really wrote it down exactly as students said it. So really it's not our voice as teachers and educators, it is the student voice. All right, and finally, we're going to show how Erica closes out step 3 of the QFT.
What did we choose? What's your best top question, 1 or 2? And I'm going to put a little star next to that one. We can see if we're kind of all thinking along the same lines. Benji, what number? Or are you going to say what the question is?
I raised my hand for 2 reasons.
Okay.
Because of what we're doing right now.
Yeah.
And so you can unjinx me.
Unjinx. How do I do it? Do I just say your name? Benji?
Yes.
Okay.
3 times.
All right, got it. Yeah, which one?
My top question is,
Eyes and ears on Benji, please. Eyes and ears on Benji.
number 1
Why do you get this come together?
and number 6.
And when do we get them to come together? Great. Someone else? No, what was your
Number 5.
Number 5, what stuff do people do for families to come together? Eliza.
Number 2.
Number 2, how do families start being together? And it's okay to say one that someone else has said. We'll just add another star. Tessa.
Number 1.
Number 1, why do families come together? Sahant.
Number 6 and number 5. Here's number
Amira.
Number 1. Wow, we're the most
Jack. Anyone?
Who's number 1? 4 and 6. I think Jack. Yeah. Yeah. And number 1. Keita did number 6.
Anybody else?
I do 5, number 6.
I did.
What? Who said number
5.
Emily?
It looks like our top joke getter is why do families come together?
Oh yeah.
Also pretty close behind is when do we get them to come together? And then a lot of people also said, what stuff do people do for families to come together? We have a lot of questions. When we have a lot of questions, especially in social studies, we're talking about inquiry, things we're curious about, and questioning, and guess what? We're going to do so much learning
Who did 3?
during this unit.
Erica, is this typically how you close out the QFT with your students?
Yeah, I usually like to do a quick little sum up and a little preview of what we might be learning about next, and kind of where it's going so that they know that their questions might be answered as we continue, and that they'll have more opportunity to continue asking questions as well.
Thank you. All right. So we hope that by experiencing the QFT and also observing the phenomenal Erica, thank you so much for allowing us to see the QFT in action in your classroom. We hope that each of you has a better understanding of the protocol, how it engages learners, and how it supports inquiry. Would love to hear your thoughts on this question. How does the QFT engage learners and support inquiry? Feel free to reflect on that on your own or to put your thoughts into the chat. All right, wonderful. Thank you all so much for your reflections. We're going to transition into some tips and resources that you can use during the QFT.
So you've probably gathered a plethora of facilitation tips, observing Erica and taking a look at Alyssa Park in action. But I want to highlight a few more resources that you could use to support you as you facilitate the QFT in your classroom or your school communities. So the first is, and these are all tips from the Right Question Institute, to monitor group work and give clarifying instructions as needed. So going around the room and observing group work, listening for the type of questions that participants are asking, but again, trying really hard not to get pulled into their conversations, and avoiding answering any questions while students are in the process of producing questions. Erica, I loved how you kind of named that up front as an expectation for your students. Validating everyone's contributions equally, using the same word for all contributions. For example, using thank you instead of good job, great job, excellent question, to kind of avoid discouraging some students from participating because they might feel like their question's not good enough. Avoiding giving examples of questions students could ask. Again, Erica, you mentioned not wanting to impede their independent thinking and not trying to give them a direction to head in with their questioning. Allow students to work at their own pace. It's okay if some groups produce a lot of questions and other groups don't produce as many. If a group seems stuck, prompt them with that Q focus. And the value of producing questions is in the process of the thinking and the production, and not necessarily the number of questions that come out at the end. A couple of tips again from the Right Question Institute around engaging all students in the QFT is to provide question stems, like those posters that Erica had up in her classroom. Pair a written statement with an image or a short video for the Q focus. Spend time teaching and breaking down those 4 steps. In this case, we took a look at 3 steps. Give students time to generate questions individually before sharing with the group, and do the QFT as a whole class for the first time rather than splitting into groups. And Erica, if you wouldn't mind sharing some of those strategies for younger learners.
Yeah, so these ones from the Right Question Institute are practice the QFT in other subject areas, like you could try morning meeting. The more chance students have to engage in the process, the more they will improve. I haven't done much of that, but it's a great idea. I'm going to try it. And then you can start with a Q focus related to a high interest topic, like commonly watched TV or film. And then additionally, some tips for me. I want to add that you got to give yourself grace because it might be bumpy. Sometimes kids will get it. Other times they'll ask questions that are completely off topic, like how do ovens work, which is a real question I had a student ask last year. So the QFT I think is hard, especially with the youngest grades. So I think it's important to prioritize the fact that they get to be curious. And that will help them in the long run. And you might not get to see the fruits of your efforts, but next year's teachers might. So the more that kids are exposed to getting to do this type of thing, I think the more successful they'll be.
Thank you. So a lot has been introduced today, and more will come as you discover along the way. Regardless of your confidence level, we have a variety of sources to support next steps in the Inquiry Hub. And we also offer a free trial of Inquiry Journeys. And for those of you who aren't Inquiry Journeys teachers, you can access full lessons on the QFT by signing up for this free trial. And LaKethia dropped both of those links in the chat. So thank you so much.
All right, and would just love to thank all of you on behalf of inquirED. Thank you so much for participating, engaging in this session. We hope that you learned something helpful about how to support your students with generating questions, exploring their curiosity, and we would love to hear feedback on today's webinar. We'll put the link to the exit ticket in the chat for you to fill out to help make us better so that we can continue providing these offerings to you in the hopes that you're able to get more inquiry into your schools and to your classrooms. And a very special thanks to our guest, Erica. Really enjoyed watching your class and appreciate hearing your reflections.
Thanks so much for having me.